So for the past 3-4 months now, we have been repeatedly hearing this term called tariffs, especially after Donald Trump became the president of United States of America. Tariffs this, tariffs that, 50% tariffs, 100% tariffs, 150% tariffs. We have been repeatedly hearing this term. And especially Donald Trump has decided to weaponize these tariffs, use it as an economic weapon against countries. Okay, he used this weapon against Canada, his own ally. Okay, he used this weapon against Europe, used this weapon against Russia, many other countries, China, and now he's using this weapon against India. Now, the question is, what are tariffs? Okay, now some of you might know the answer to this question. Okay, what are tariffs? Plain and simple, these are taxes on imports. But the deeper question is, how do tariffs affect the economy of a country? Okay, why are they used as an economic weapon? Because if they are being used as an economic weapon, if Donald Trump is using them as an economic weapon, it might be doing something. It might be affecting a country's economy in some way or the other. If it was not the case, then why would India be so worried about American tariffs? Right? So, how do tariffs affect the economy of a country? We'll try to investigate this deep question. So, let's hear about this. Okay? So hello and welcome to Jumbo IS and welcome to this special lecture series of ours called UPSC Nuggets. In this lecture series, we'll try to cover one topic every day from our UPSC syllabus. And these topics are chosen specifically based on their probability of featuring in your exams. So whatever topics we are going to cover in this lecture series, well, they have a very high probability of featuring in your exams. We have specifically chosen them on that basis. So if you're consistent and regular with this lecture series, well, in more than 1 year's time or in around 1 year's time, you would have covered more than 300 topics, important topics. So be consistent and regular with this lecture series, okay? And today we are going to talk about tariffs and how tariffs are used as an economic weapon. So let's talk about this, okay? So tariffs as an economic weapon. Now this word tariff, well, has gained a lot of currency, especially America. Donald Trump's America has started utilizing it as an economic weapon. Simply put, what are tariffs? Tariffs are nothing but taxes on imports. Okay, so if Donald Trump says that he is going to apply 50% tariffs on India, that means whatever Indian goods are being imported into America will be taxed by American government at a 50% rate. That means if Americans are buying $100 worth of Indian goods, okay, then $50 would be paid as taxes by the American importers to the government. Simple. These are tariffs. But how are tariffs used as economic weapon? Well, to understand the economic potency of tariffs, you need to understand a special term called mercantilism. Okay? Because this weapon called tariffs has been in use for like 300-400 years. Okay? For 300-400 years, countries, especially Western countries, have been applying tariffs. Okay, so this is basically an old weapon, and the ideology from which this weapon comes is known as the mercantilist ideology or mercantilism. So let's talk about mercantilism. Okay, this is something from which Donald Trump is currently borrowing. So what is mercantilism? Hear me out carefully. Okay, what is mercantilism? So the basic definition is, mercantilism is a form of economic system and nationalist economic policy that is designed to maximize the exports and minimize the imports of an economy. Now, what does that mean? Well, a country is following mercantilism if it tries to decrease its imports and increase its exports. Okay? And they use all sorts of means and measures to achieve that. You have to take your imports to zero or as low as possible, and you have to increase your exports. This is mercantilist philosophy. Simple. And why do we do so? Well, why did these countries decide to follow this mercantilist philosophy? Well, the thing is that logically speaking, imports are generally considered to be a leakage in your GDP. Why? It is a leakage basically because when you import something, you buy certain goods from foreigners, you pay them. So money is getting out of your country. It is like a leakage. Whereas exports are considered to be an injection in your economy. Because when you export something, when you sell certain goods, foreigners are paying you money. So your country is receiving money in return. So it is a form of injection in your GDP. So exports basically increase your GDP because money is coming into your country, and imports were considered to be leakage, or still considered to be leakage in your GDP or leakage in your economy. That is why, simply put, okay, it was a simple theory, mercantilism. It said that the main aim of any country should be to increase its GDP. And the way you can increase your GDP is to minimize your imports as much as possible and to maximize your exports as much as possible, because exports act as injection and imports act as leakage. This was mercantilist philosophy. Now, how to do that? How to achieve this? Clear? Now, remember, I have told you this. Mercantilism philosophy is as old as 300-400 years. Okay? So, it was the most dominant economic theory 300-400 years back. It is very old. Clear? Now, how to achieve this? How to minimize imports, maximize exports? Okay? So, there are two ways. Or we'll call them two types of trade barriers. Why do we call them trade barriers? Because you are somehow blocking your imports. You are creating a barrier as far as imports are concerned. So there are two ways of creating trade barriers on imports. Okay, one is called tariff barriers. The other is called non-tariff barriers. Okay. We'll come to tariff barriers, but first let's get non-tariff barriers out of the way. So what are non-tariff barriers? So certain quota restrictions. Quota restrictions means that let's suppose America buys this pen from India. Now American government says that in 1 year, America will not buy more than 100 pens from India. Even if there is demand of 200 pens from India, America will only allow 100 pens. These are quota restrictions. You have just given a 100 pen quota to India. Okay. This is non-tariff barrier. Okay. Second would be quality restrictions. Okay. So America buys a lot of agricultural products from India, right? Now America might cite some quality restrictions that your apples are of low quality. Okay, they might create some artificially very high standards of quality so as to reject consignments of Indian imports. Quality exports, quality restrictions. Then third example can be environmental. So America might say that, or Europe says this, Europe does this a lot, that the pen produced by India is produced in factories that emit a lot of greenhouse gases. It is causing a lot of global warming. So we won't buy from India because Indian factories are emitting a lot of greenhouse gases. So these are environmental restrictions. We will only buy from India if they have green factories. Let's suppose they do this. Okay. These are non-tariff barriers. Non-tariff basically means non-tax. Okay. You're not applying any form of tax, but still you are somehow restricting imports. Okay. So these are non-tariff barriers. But now let's talk about the most important thing, because, well, we are out here to discuss this only, tariffs. Tariff barriers. What are tariff barriers and how do they work? Okay, hear me out closely. Okay, hear me out properly. Okay, now look, tariffs are nothing but import taxes. Okay. Now listen to me, and I'll explain this to you with an example. let's suppose, well, American people buy this pen. Okay. Now, when they buy from domestic industries in USA, okay, when they buy American made pens, it costs them $10. Okay. But they have another option. Well, Indians also make this pen, but Indians make this pen cheaper. Okay. What do Indians do? When they buy from India, this same pen costs them $8 because Indians are willing to sell this pen for $8. Now, what would Americans do? Americans would definitely buy from India. Yes, because Indians are able to sell this pen for cheap. Now, this would increase imports from India. Yes, Americans would have to import a lot from India. But who would gain from this? India would gain from this because Indian exports would increase. Indians would be very happy. Clear? That our exports to America are rising. It is injecting in our GDP. Injection in our GDP, right? Who would be unhappy? American factories. American pen makers would be very unhappy because American pen makers or American factories who are producing this pen are not able to sell this pen because American people are preferring Indian pens. Right? And they are not able to sell this pen because they are selling this pen at a high cost. So, and they can't reduce their cost also because labor cost of land is very high in America. All of this is happening. So they are not able to sell this pen. Okay. Now their factories will close down. People would become jobless and jobs would be generated in India where new factories are opening up because Americans are buying Indian goods. Right? So American manufacturing is suffering because of this. So what does the American government do? American government applies 50% tax on Indian pen. Okay. So Indian pen is $8. 50% of $8 would be $4. So now when you are buying Indian pen, you have to pay $4 to the government. So therefore, the final cost for the consumer of this pen would be $12. Because of this extra 50% tax, Indian pen has now become expensive. So what would happen? Now Americans will shift towards what? American pens. Okay, because they are selling for $10 and Indian exports would decline. Right? That is why India is very unhappy when Donald Trump has applied 50% tariffs because many industries in India are dependent on exports to America. Now they'll have to pay 50% tariffs. What is the downside for this? Well, their exports would decline. And who would gain from this? American companies who manufacture same goods. That is why Indians are not happy with this because many Indian companies are going to suffer from this. You understand this point? So these import taxes are nothing but tariff barriers. So like I said, there are two types of barriers, tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers. You understood non-tariff barriers? Well, these were tariff barriers. Simple, very simple. Okay. Now, what are the benefits of tariff barriers? Okay. Why did mercantilists or people who followed the ideology of mercantilism favored tariff barriers, favored this philosophy? Okay, there are 2-3 advantages to this philosophy and Donald Trump is currently looking at these 2-3 advantages. So what are these? First of all, well, American government would increase their tax revenue. Yes, because that 50% tariff or 50% tax is going to American government. So American tax revenue increases. Yes. Number 2, well, like I said, mercantilist philosophy says that minimize your imports, maximize your exports. Yes, simply put. So, well, when your imports are going to decline, this will stop leakage from your economy. Your GDP would be saved. That is another reason. And the other reason is it will give a boost to domestic industry, American companies. You saw now American companies would be able to sell their $10 pens, right? So these are the three major advantages of mercantilist philosophy, or what mercantilists believe, that these are the advantages, therefore every country should follow mercantilism. Yes, and Donald Trump is also currently looking at this. Okay, tax revenue would increase. Okay, government would earn a lot of money. Leakage would stop. Boost to domestic industry, domestic manufacturing, jobs in America would increase. More factories will open. More jobs would get generated. Joblessness problem in America would get solved. All of these things are being looked upon. And there is fourth reason as well, which Donald Trump is using. He is using tariffs for geopolitical reasons as well. So he is using tariffs for geopolitical objectives. For example, he is telling India to not buy from Russia. If they'll buy from Russia, we will add extra tariffs on you. So that is a geopolitical objective. So he's using tariffs for these four things. Simple. And India is not happy with it because this would have a problem for Indian exports. Clear? Now, the thing is that I told you that this philosophy is as old as 300-400 years. Okay, this philosophy is very old. But there was a man who criticized this philosophy 200-300 years ago only. And that person is known as father of economics. His name is Adam Smith. Okay, he criticized this philosophy. He criticized this ideology. And because of Adam Smith, well, mercantilism declined. People stopped following mercantilism because the father of economics, who wrote a book called Wealth of Nations, really criticized this mercantilist approach. Okay, he wrote this book called Wealth of Nations, and in that book, he called this mercantilist philosophy or mercantilist approach as beggar thy neighbor policy. Now, what do you mean by beggar thy neighbor policy? Okay, America, by applying tariffs on India, is trying to beggar India, right? So this would have an impact on Indian exports. Yes. Now, do you think India will sit quietly? India would also retaliate and apply tariffs on America, right? So what is happening as an outcome? Well, USA is not able to sell to India because India has high tariffs. India is not able to sell to USA because USA has high tariffs. Both of them are not able to sell to each other, and because of that, exports have fallen. So America decided to do this to beggar India, but in return, its own exports have declined because those countries have applied this policy on America as well. So you started to beggar the other country, but in return, you got beggared yourself, if that is a word, beggared. That is why he called it beggar thy neighbor policy. Also, there were many other reasons given by Adam Smith to criticize this policy. Okay, many other reasons. We won't get into that. But I wanted you to be familiar with this term called beggar thy neighbor policy. So this is what beggar thy neighbor policy was. And that is why when Adam Smith became very famous, okay, many policymakers stopped following this policy of mercantilism and started moving towards free trade. Okay, America started moving towards free trade. But now America has gotten back to mercantilism, especially after Donald Trump. Okay, and why? Well, I have explained these four reasons to you. So let's see what happens in future. But now you're clear what mercantilism is, what beggar thy neighbor policy is, and how tariffs can be used as an economic weapon. Now you're more clear. Okay, but if you have any doubts, feel free to ask your doubts, post your doubts in the comment section below. I'm eagerly waiting for your doubts. Okay, and please be consistent and regular with this new lecture series called UPSC Nuggets, because if you're consistent and regular, in a very short span of time, you will be covering one important concept every day. So be consistent and regular, and I'll see you next time with another concept from maybe some other subject, not just economics. Thank you, everyone.